Well, hello there. So in this video, we're going to take a look at Extra Practice Module 62. And in this one, it's about monopolies and how they're regulated by the government to address their market failures. So, we talked in a previous video about how monopolies are a great example of how the free market doesn't always lead to the optimal outcome, and these are inefficient outcomes. And so this whole module is about how could government maybe remedy that problem in a way that satisfies as many people as possible. So the first question for Check Your Understanding number 1 says, what should a government do in each of these following situations? And in part A, it's a cable company, and consumers feel they're being overcharged, but the company says it needs to cover its costs. So the government could set up a price ceiling, right, or a price maximum to the price equaling the ATC. And if they do that, then they essentially are telling the monopolist you're allowed to break even, and it'll bring that price down a little bit. For part B, which is over to the right, and we scroll over, the only 2 airlines that currently fly to Alaska need government approval to merge, but other airlines want to fly there and they need allocated landing slots to do it. So we could approve, be nice if I could spell, approve the merger if they divest some of those slots, some slots. And so that allows other companies to get into that market and fly to Alaska. Okay, let's take a look at question number 2 here. It says, true or false, explain your answer. Society's welfare is lower under a monopoly because some consumer surplus is transformed into profit from the monopolist. That is not true. That one's, let me go with A, let's say A, false. And at first, right, we might think that that's a little strange, but that's actually not the root of why society's welfare is lower, because welfare is the idea of surplus, right? And total surplus isn't lower because some of the consumer surplus got turned into profit for the monopolist, because that still counts as kind of welfare for society. Because welfare is lower because we have fewer transactions, right? That's why we would actually say that the deadweight loss exists, is because there aren't as many transactions occurring. It's not the result of the like consumer surplus being transformed into profit. We could actually maximize total surplus by essentially eliminating all of the consumer surplus and letting the monopolist price discriminate, which is what Module 63 is all about. So part A is false, although it might be really tempting to say true. Part B says a monopolist causes inefficiency because there are consumers who are willing to pay a price greater than or equal to marginal cost, but less than the monopolist price, and that is true. And that's because, right, the idea of efficiency in terms of allocative efficiency, so we'll put that word here, allocative, is allocating the transactions, because efficiency is when marginal cost equals the price. And so if we aren't doing marginal cost pricing, then what we do have is allocative inefficiency. Question number 3. So for this one, suppose a monopolist mistakenly believes that their marginal revenue is always equal to the market price, which we know that's not true, right? It diverges. Assuming constant marginal cost and no fixed cost, draw a diagram comparing the level of profit, surplus, deadweight loss for whatever. So we'll draw a quick little diagram here, and it says constant marginal cost. So that's going to look like that, right? That kind of marginal cost, or the downward sloping demand, and the marginal revenue separated. Now, if this monopolist, right, we had them in their situation where they're thinking that their marginal revenue is the price, they're still going to produce here, but then they price here, right? So this is the misguided one. And so for them, marginal cost equals the ATC. For them, it's going to be too few of a quantity. So that's the misguided. And the price, though, will be the accurate one. So it's kind of a strange situation where basically they're not going to produce enough in that situation. Marginal revenue is always equal to the market price. So I think that this is where we're wanting to go here. And then they want us to do like level of profit, consumer surplus, total surplus, and deadweight loss. So in short, right, if they were the smart monopolist, they would be up here pricing way up high on the demand curve. And so the smart monopolist would get all of this profit. We'd say profit for the smart one, but none for the misguided one. Misguided, what a nice way of saying the monopolist isn't doing what they're supposed to. They both still have deadweight loss because they're both underproducing. And so they both have deadweight loss. And they both end up actually with the same amount of surplus because they have the same amount of transactions. There's more consumer surplus for the misguided monopolist. Instead, all of this profit, right? All of this profit rectangle becomes part of the consumer surplus for the misguided monopolist. So they basically, their profit turns into consumer surplus, but it doesn't help with total surplus because we still have the deadweight loss because we're still producing too little of a quantity. Okay, let's take a look at the multiple choice questions. For each of these here, number one, which of the following statements is true of a monopoly compared to perfectly competitive market? Number one, consumer surplus is smaller. That's true. Profit is smaller. That's not true. We know that monopolists earn larger profits, and deadweight loss is smaller. We also know that that's not true because perfectly competitive markets don't have deadweight loss in that sense. So we would say one, only A. Number two, which of the following is true of a natural monopoly? It experiences diseconomies of scale? No, because it's always in the downward sloping range. It always experiences economies of scale. ATC is lower if there's a single firm in the market. That is true of a natural monopoly, right? That's why they're called kind of natural. C, it occurs in a market that relies on natural resources. No, because you can have natural monopolies that don't, right? Like a cable company, it doesn't rely on natural resources. Decreasing returns to scale, that's the same answer as A, so we're going to rule that one out. And E, the government has to provide the good or service. That's also not true. So we know that B is the correct answer here. Number three, which of the following government actions is the most common for a natural monopoly? And we'd say that typically they just regulate them. So we don't want to prevent their formation or break them up because then they'd be higher costs. So use price regulation, C. Although D, public ownership, that sometimes is considered for these types of things. But in the United States, it's not the most common solution for a natural monopoly. Number four, which of the following markets is an example of a regulated natural monopoly? Local cable TV, gas, cell phone, organic tomatoes, diamonds. Out of all of these, the only one that's really even a natural monopoly is local cable TV, although diamonds maybe, although that's more probably an artificial monopoly now. And diamond markets aren't even a monopoly anymore. Organic tomatoes, cell phones, and gas are not monopolies, so A is our correct answer. And in many markets, local cable TV is actually pretty regulated, so in terms of their pricing structures. Which of the following is most likely to be higher for a regulated natural monopoly than for unregulated? So which one would be higher for unregulated? Or no, higher for regulated? You can see that these are tough questions. I need my cup of coffee. Product variety, no, because there's only one product. Quantity, yeah, there's going to be more quantity. If you regulate them and you push their price lower, they're going to increase output. So we would expect B to be the right answer. And higher price, no, because a regulated natural monopoly would have a lower price. Higher profit, no, because when you lower their price, they lose their profit. And higher deadweight loss, no, because when you lower the price, you increase the quantity and therefore reduce this deadweight loss that exists, right? If we push that quantity over to the right, that deadweight loss triangle gets smaller and smaller. So a correct answer is higher quantity, B. Okay, and our last problem, free response number 2. Take a look down here, draw a correctly labeled graph of a natural monopoly, and then identify each of the following. Surplus if the market were able to operate as perfectly competitive, consumer surplus with the monopoly, monopoly profit, deadweight loss. Okay. Quantity, price, downward sloping demand, marginal revenue. Now, it's a natural monopoly. So the easiest way that we're going to do this is just draw a straight line and say marginal cost. And I'm just going to get lazy and say marginal cost equals the ATC and just say that they don't have any other costs aside from that. So they are going to produce at MR equals MC here. Q star, P star. Consumer surplus if the market were able to operate as perfectly competitive. I'm just going to use some letters. A, B, C, D, E. So these 5 areas, A, B, C, D, E, would all be if they were perfectly competitive, because this is the socially optimal point, right? Remember that where marginal cost equals the price, or where supply equals demand is the socially optimal point. And so we would say that if we were perfectly competitive, we'd be producing at this quantity and this price, perfectly competitive. And so all of the area above that price up to the demand curve, which would be A, B, C, D, E, would all be consumer surplus if the market were operating as perfectly competitive. However, because they're not, right, then we know that the price is going to be P star. And so they're going to price up here on the demand curve at Q star because This is marginal cost equals marginal revenue occurs at this point. And so we go up to the demand curve, find the price, and we know that the area under the demand curve now is just A and B. And so consumer surplus is much smaller. Monopoly profit is just the distance from the price to the ATC and over to the quantity. So it's the box CD. And part D says deadweight loss, and that's just this area, right? Part E. Okay, so hopefully this helped you. See you next time.